Vladimir Zelensky noted the accuracy of the nighttime long-range strikes on targets in Russia. The president emphasized that the drones Ukraine uses in response to Russian terror performed well. The head of state also listened to a report from the commander-in-chief of the armed forces about the situation at the front, particularly in Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, Dobropilya, and other areas of Donetsk region. In addition, the president of Ukraine discussed the situation in the energy sector in detail, especially regarding the fulfillment of agreements with partners. Zelensky assured that gas imports will be fully funded and thanked all the countries that are already helping Ukraine. Our most substantial agreements are with Norway, and we are working out the details with other European countries. We are counting on the support of the European Union, and negotiations on this matter will take place during the week. We will provide as much assistance as possible for all needs. I am expecting a report from Ukraine's Minister of Energy after meetings with representatives of the G7. This week, the G7 made a significant statement in support of our energy sector following Russian strikes, and it is important to make this support as substantial as possible. The energy ministers of the G7 countries have promised active assistance in restoring Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which was destroyed as a result of Russian shelling. This will help stabilize and rebuild critically important facilities. This is stated in the G7 declaration published on the official website of the Canadian government. The countries will also continue to strengthen sanctions against Russia, including those aimed at limiting its energy revenues. And the fight against Russia's shadow tanker fleet. The group of 7 ministers discussed Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy sector.
Russia continues to destroy Ukraine's energy system. In recent months, Russia has been intensively using drones, striking the same targets repeatedly and increasing the warhead power of Shahed drones. These strikes weaken civilian infrastructure and threaten the safety of the population. It is also important to acknowledge the courage of Ukrainian energy workers, who continue to provide the country with light and heat despite constant threats and the loss of colleagues during emergency repair work. We support efforts to restore and stabilize Ukraine's energy sector, and we are also working to strengthen investor confidence. The G7 continues to support the restoration of Ukraine's energy sector through direct financial assistance, credit lines, and risk insurance. Alignment of policies and resources, as well as creating conditions for long-term private sector investment. And the G7 statement:
81 combat engagements have been recorded on the front since the beginning of the day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and the main focus is on the Pokrovsk direction. For more on the successes of Ukrainian defenders and a detailed overview of the situation on the battlefield as a whole, stay tuned.
The situation in Pokrovsk remains difficult and dynamic. However, the defense forces have managed to improve their tactical position in several city blocks and increase the number of their assault groups. This was reported by the press service of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are also keeping the enemy under fire control, and the number of Russian occupiers in Pokrovsk is gradually decreasing. In just the past few days, 85 invaders have been eliminated in the city.
Certain actions are being taken that should make it possible to stabilize the situation in some areas of the Pokrovsk front, or at least to get closer to a certain stabilization, because we understand that urban combat has its own specific nature. This is not like fighting in groves or in open fields. And accordingly, this complicates the work of counter-sabotage groups operating there. On our side, accordingly, identifying those Russian soldiers who have concentrated in the city and are hiding in the ruins, well, this also complicates the work of our drones operating at low altitude.
The Russian occupation forces continue to put pressure on Kupiansk. According to Ukrainian military reports, from the perspective of air operations, the city has found itself in what is called a double siege. While Russian UAVs are trying to cut off supplies to the defense forces, Ukrainian drones are acting symmetrically, completely blocking the invaders' supply routes. On the ground, the enemy continues to strengthen its presence in the northern areas of the settlement, trying to advance further into the city.
The enemy has concentrated on the northern and northwestern outskirts of the city. The enemy is trying to attack, and the fighting continues accordingly. But again, the struggle over logistics is no less important, as I have already noted, including in the Kupiansk direction. Let's remember that there is the Oskil River, where the Russians periodically try to set up crossings and move their troops and heavy equipment across. However, so far they have not succeeded. So, as of today, the fighting continues, the battles are fierce, but there have been no significant advances. And in general, there have been no major changes in this section of the front, at least over the past few days.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the aggressor attacked in the areas of the settlements of Korovi, Yar, Zarechny and Stavki. Near Konstantinovka, there were clashes around Pleshchevka, Rusiny Yar and Sofievka. And on the Alexandrovka section of the front, Ukrainian defenders repelled Russian enemy assaults. Near Zeleny, Verbovoye, Alexiivka, Pavlovka, Rybnoe and towards Danilovka. Ukrainian intelligence operatives disabled the Koltsevoy oil pipeline in the Moscow region. All 3 lines of the Koltsevoy pipeline have been destroyed. These are blows to finances. These are blows to the energy component of the Russian Federation, because we understand perfectly well that no matter how powerful or weak it may be, the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation nevertheless is highly dependent, well, just like everywhere else, on the so-called switch. If it gets turned off, then the assembly lines will stop and shells won't be produced. That's just to explain it in simple terms, as they say. That's why we see that such strikes are continuing and they're becoming more active. It's clear that increasing long-range capabilities is very much needed in Ukraine. The Atesh agent network conducted reconnaissance in the Leningrad region of Russia. Partisans infiltrated air defense units that protect St. Petersburg. They discovered the positions of the S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile system, the command post, radar stations, as well as duty schedules and patrol routes. All the information obtained has already been passed on by the partisans to the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And in the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have eliminated 900 Russian occupiers. Thus, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,142,000 people. In addition, the day before, the Defense Forces destroyed 6 Russian tanks, 2 armored vehicles, and 9 artillery systems. They also burned 1 multiple-launch rocket system, 2 air defense systems, and 59 units of enemy special automotive equipment.
The Pentagon has approved the possible delivery of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. They determined that this would not harm the U.S. weapons stockpiles. According to CNN, the final political decision must now be made by Donald Trump. Earlier, during a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump stated that he was not inclined to share Tomahawks, as they are needed for the defense of the United States of America. According to sources, CNN's channels report that the military had already given their positive assessment to the White House before this meeting. In Europe, the Pentagon's decision was seen as a signal that Washington may soon approve the transfer of missiles to Kyiv. However, questions remain about their deployment and the training of Ukrainian military personnel. In November 2025, Ukraine is expected to launch a controlled arms export program. We are talking about weapons of which enough have been produced and which are stored in warehouses. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced this following the meeting with government members. The proceeds will be used to finance weapons in short supply, the head of state explained. My colleague will tell you more about this, Andrei Dmitrenko.
Kyiv's partners are ready to purchase Ukrainian drones, Business Insider reports. Ukraine's production capacities allow it to fulfill government orders and enter global markets, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine is confident. In 2024, the country produced 2,200,000 FPV drones. With proper funding, by 2026 Ukraine's defense industry will be able to increase these figures ninefold, Minister Denis Shmihal is convinced. Additional investments will give a powerful boost to the development of the domestic industry. That is why Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised the prompt launch of a controlled arms export program.
The Minister of Defense of Ukraine must ensure full completion of the tasks for the production and delivery of FPV drones, interceptor drones, and deep strike drones by the end of the year. By the end of the year, we must reach the target of 50% of our state's defense being provided by Ukrainian-made weapons. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Facebook. In
the supply of Ukrainian weapons, Denmark, Norway, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Lithuania are interested, according to the head of state. Analysts are confident that there will be many more interested parties once Kyiv launches its export mechanisms at full capacity.
Ukrainian equipment, not only does it work, you can rely on it, and it's highly effective, but it's also several times cheaper. If you look at individual pieces of equipment in Western countries, you can buy the same drones. For a certain class, they cost $10,000 each for government budgets, while Ukraine is buying these drones in bulk for $500 a piece. Only we have experience in localization, only we have experience in integrating a huge number of technologies in the shortest possible time.
Drone manufacturers say that export priority will be given to those countries that have signed defense agreements with Kyiv. More and more of Ukraine's partners are signing agreements on joint weapons production. At the end of October, the defense ministers of Ukraine and Croatia met to discuss military cooperation. According to Denis Shmyhal, Zagreb is ready to start joint production of drones.
Together with the Deputy Prime Minister and Croatian Defense Minister Ivan Anušić, we signed a letter of intent to deepen defense industrial cooperation. We agreed to create joint production chains and cooperation between our defense industries. We are preparing a joint industrial forum for manufacturers at the beginning of next year. Denis Shmyhal, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, on Telegram.
These joint ventures are operating not only in Ukraine but also abroad. In a few weeks, a Ukrainian-British plant for the production of Octopus anti-aircraft interceptor drones will open in the United Kingdom. They are intended to counter Russian UAVs. The plan is to produce several thousand of these drones per month.
Our Ukrainian friends will share their technologies and intellectual property with the United Kingdom, and in turn we will further develop them and produce them on a large scale so that we can supply Ukraine with thousands of interceptor drones every month. Alistair Cairns, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for the Armed Forces of the United Kingdom, from a Defense Express publication. Ukrainian air defense shoots down 80% of Russian drones, and Brussels should learn from this experience. The EU Commissioner for Defense, Andrius Kubilius, stated that Brussels needs to adopt Kyiv's experience. The European Union intends to implement the Drone Wall project, which is designed to protect the airspace of EU member states from hybrid attacks by the aggressor country. Ukraine, as a leader in drone technology, is ready to help partner countries, assured Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal.
NATO has prepared a defense plan against a possible Russian attack on alliance members. The plan spans nearly 4,500 pages and focuses on the eastern flank. This was reported by the German publication Welt. The document was developed with the participation of all 32 NATO members under the leadership of the Supreme Command of the Alliance's land forces. The plan provides for a series of comprehensive measures to protect the organization's eastern flank. In particular, it concerns strengthening combat units, redeploying heavy equipment, and using drones, nuclear systems, and autonomous systems. A separate issue is improved coordination and data sharing among allies. For almost 2 hours, operations at Berlin-Brandenburg Airport in Germany were halted. This was due to an unidentified drone. The incident occurred the previous evening. Several flights were redirected to other airfields. After security checks and the cancellation of the alert, flights resumed. By the way, this is not the first case of aviation security being breached by drones. Just at the beginning of October, unidentified UAVs disrupted operations at Germany's second-largest airport in Munich. Lithuanian Prime Minister Inga Ruginin stated that the country will not tolerate violations of its airspace and will respond firmly to each of them. According to her, all diplomatic channels have already been used, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is preparing additional sanctions against Belarus. Ruginin described the recent incident with balloons as a hybrid attack aimed at creating a threat to aviation. She emphasized that these actions are deliberate and require a decisive response. In
the country, several mobile groups, police, border guards, and the army have been operating all week. Night patrols and other measures to protect the country's territory are also being carried out. We are responding quite firmly and declare that we will respond decisively to any violations of our airspace. We want to combine sanctions against Belarus and Russia, and this issue will be submitted for consideration to the European Commission. The same goes for the border closures. This is also a preventive measure, and we hope it will be effective. Ingrida Šimonytė, Prime Minister of Lithuania, in an interview with LSM.
Ukraine fully supports Lithuania in light of the increasing provocations from Belarus, which have already disrupted civil aviation and created tensions at the border. This was reported by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, who called on Europe to unite and increase pressure on the regimes in Moscow and Minsk.
Ukraine stands in solidarity with Lithuania in the face of Belarusian provocations and incursions into Lithuanian airspace, which have caused disruptions to civil aviation. Lukashenko's actions should be viewed as part of Russia's hybrid attacks on Europe. We call on Europe to unite, to be strong, and to put pressure on both regimes to make it clear that such actions come at a price. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
The Russian economy is entering a phase where even official statistics can no longer hide the scale of the problems. In particular, as reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the profits of enterprises this year have decreased by 8%. This indicates a systemic decline in business activity. And in the credit market, the share of problematic borrowers has reached almost 25%. In addition, more than 165,000 Russian companies are already unable to service their debts. Analysts note that all this data indicates that the Russian economy is losing its ability to generate profit even in its strongest sectors. And the growth of debt suggests that the crisis is not a temporary disruption but is becoming the norm. Across Russia, repairs to the country's infrastructure are being postponed en masse. According to the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the official explanation for this is a lack of funding. But in reality, there is only one reason. State debts are being spent on the war against Ukraine, and even these resources are rapidly running out. Analysts note that the Russian economy has started to deteriorate even faster. My colleague Nikita Skoblikov will continue on this topic.
The Russian economy is deteriorating faster than expected. This is being recorded by the Institute for Emerging Economies of the Bank of Finland. All key indicators are going down. Even the Kremlin's pessimistic forecasts are not coming true. The main reason is the bet on war. Virtually all of the country's resources are being thrown into military spending, while other sectors are simply suffocating under these conditions.
In our current forecast, it is assumed that government spending will contribute to maintaining domestic demand and especially production in sectors related to military expenditures. Growth in other sectors of the economy will be limited by a labor shortage and tighter borrowing conditions. Unless there are significant changes in Russia's domestic policy or major external shocks, we expect Russia's GDP to grow by only 1% per year throughout the forecast period. From the report of the Bank of Finland Institute for Emerging Economies.
Finnish analysts emphasize that Russia's economy is being stifled by military spending and dependence on China. The report states that more than 40% of the state budget is spent on the war against Ukraine and so-called internal security. At the same time, revenues are growing, more slowly than expenditures, and the deficit is increasing. Moscow has only one way left to plug the gaps, raise taxes, and cut spending on its own citizens. In
the Novosibirsk, Orenburg, Yaroslavl, Voronezh, and Ulyanovsk regions, as well as in Dagestan and Krasnoyarsk Krai, they have already started planning to increase regional levies. Specifically, in 3 regions, the vehicle tax will increase. In the Novosibirsk region by 10.9%, in Krasnoyarsk Krai by more than 10%, and in the Orenburg region by more than 30%. From a publication by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service on Telegram.
In addition to raising taxes, the Kremlin is also cutting financial support for its citizens and various social benefits. Analysts note that the Russian economy is currently in an extremely vulnerable position.
The reduction of various programs that previously stimulated the Russian economy, such as preferential mortgages and certain other payments for some people, as well as tax increases, are attempts to collect certain funds, so to speak, retroactively. This is happening after the relevant financial books have already been closed, among many other things. At the
beginning of 2025, Russian media reported that the level of Russia's national debt had reached 13.5% and continues to grow. Experts warn that this trend is leading the country toward financial instability. Resources are not being used for development, but to maintain the military machine. As a result, across the Russian Federation, there is a mass. Repairs to infrastructure objects, from roads and communication lines to schools and kindergartens, are being postponed en masse. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, the official reasons cited are lack of funding, delays in the delivery of materials, and equipment shortages. But in reality, the reason is obvious. State funds are being redirected to continue the war against Ukraine.
In Kamchatka, the repair of the underwater internet cable has been postponed until 2026, which puts the region's residents at risk of losing high-speed connectivity. A similar situation is observed in the transportation sector. The reconstruction of one of the most accident-prone highways in the Rostov region, Novocherkassk-Kamenolomny, has been postponed until 2027. In Baesk and Podufia, road repair plans have also been disrupted due to a lack of equipment and heavy machinery workload. In Kaluga, the reconstruction of 2 central streets was postponed due to limited funding, and in Kurgan, street repairs have been postponed indefinitely. From a publication by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine on the agency's website.
These are problems that can be described as an introduction or perhaps even the beginning of stagnation, primarily in the civilian sectors of the economy. It's clear why resources are being redirected to the military sector, and naturally the civilian economy is suffering as a result. This is essentially an economy where a significant and large-scale reallocation of funds is taking place in favor of the military-industrial complex.
The Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service sums it up. Even though the Kremlin keeps insisting on the supposed development of the country's regions, the reality tells a different story. The state's resources have been scorched by the war. Everything that still functions is not aimed at improving people's lives, but at sustaining the military machine.